The history of USA-South Korea relations. From early encounters to a strategic alliance, the relationship between the United States and South Korea is one of the most significant and multifaceted partnerships in the modern international system. Anchored in shared democratic values, military cooperation, and economic interdependence, this alliance has deep roots in history and continues to adapt to new global challenges. From tense early encounters in the 19th century to the formation of a formal security alliance in the 20th, and now to an evolving global strategic partnership in the 21st, US-South Korea relations reflect a unique blend of resilience, mutual benefit, and trust. This article offers a chronological and thematic overview of this important bilateral relationship. The 1871 U.S. expedition to Korea, Shinmyeongju. In 1871, the United States launched its first military expedition to Korea, known as the Shinmyeongju Western Disturbance in the Shinmi year. This encounter marked the first significant contact between the two nations and unfolded during a period of growing American interest in establishing diplomatic and commercial ties in East Asia. Background and motivation: the U.S. aimed to investigate the fate of the merchant ship General Sherman, destroyed in 1866 after a failed attempt to open trade, establish formal trade relations with the Korean kingdom, known as Hosan, demonstrate naval strength and resolve following failed diplomatic outreach. At the time, Korea adhered to a strict isolationist policy, earning the nickname Hermit Kingdom. The Korean government, wary of Western imperialism, rejected foreign overtures and sought to protect its sovereignty. The conflict on Ganghwa Island: when the U.S. naval squadron entered Korean waters near Ganghwa Island without official permission, tensions escalated. After Korean shore batteries fired warning shots, U.S. forces launched a punitive assault, resulting in a short but intense battle. The U.S. captured several Korean forts, including key fortifications on Ganghwa Island. Approximately 250 Korean soldiers were killed, while U.S. casualties were minimal: 3 killed, over a dozen wounded. Despite the military success, the U.S. failed to achieve diplomatic or trade agreements. Aftermath and significance: although the U.S. showed its naval capability, the Korean government remained resolute in its isolationist stance. The expedition did not result in a treaty, and Korea continued to resist foreign influence for another decade. However, the conflict left a lasting impression on both sides, foreshadowed future diplomatic efforts, including the 1882 Treaty of Amity and Commerce, highlighted the growing military reach of the United States during the 19th century. Legacy: the 1871 expedition is remembered differently in each country, a forgotten show of force in American history, but a symbol of resistance and sovereignty in Korean memory. Today it remains a pivotal moment in early U.S.-Korea relations. The 1882 Treaty of Peace, Amity, Commerce, and Navigation, Korea's first step onto the global stage in the spring of 1882. A pivotal chapter in East Asian diplomacy was written with the signing of the Treaty of Peace, Amity, Commerce, and Navigation between the United States and the Joseon Dynasty of Korea, also known as the Shufelt Treaty, named after U.S. naval officer Commodore Robert W. Shufelt. This agreement was more than a bilateral accord. It was a transformative moment in Korea's history, marking its entry into the modern international community. Context: Korea at the crossroads. For centuries, the Joseon dynasty 1392 to 1897 had maintained a policy of diplomatic isolation, sometimes referred to as the Hermit Kingdom. Tied to China through the tributary system, Joseon Korea avoided formal contact with Western powers, largely staying insulated from global currents of imperialism and industrialization. However, by the late 19th century, geopolitical forces were shifting. The opening of Japan following Commodore Perry's expedition in 1853 had set a precedent. The Treaty of Ganghwa in 1876, which Japan used to pry open Korean ports, was a clear warning that the age of isolation could no longer hold. The United States, seeking commercial opportunities and strategic footholds in Asia, took this opportunity to negotiate its own treaty, this time with a more cooperative and sovereign Korea. The Shufelt Treaty. Key provisions. Signed on May 22, 1882, at Chemmilpo, modern-day Incheon. The treaty outlined a number of groundbreaking provisions. It represented a balance between mutual respect and unequal power dynamics common in Western treaties with Asian nations at the time. 1. Perpetual peace and friendship. The treaty formally established a foundation of peace between the two nations. Both parties pledged to maintain peaceful relations and support each other against unjust aggression from third parties. This clause was symbolic, meant to reassure both countries of mutual respect, but it also hinted at a larger U.S. strategy to prevent European dominance in East Asia. 2. Diplomatic and consular exchange. For the first time, Korea agreed to the stationing of foreign diplomats within its borders. The treaty allowed for embassies and consulates to be opened in both countries, marking the beginning of regular diplomatic dialogue. This exchange allowed Koreans and Americans to engage on a government-to-government level, enabling future negotiations and the handling of citizen affairs abroad. 3. Extraterritorial rights for U.S. citizens. One of the more controversial aspects of the treaty was the clause granting extraterritoriality to U.S. citizens in Korea. This meant that Americans living or doing business in Korea would be subject to U.S. laws and courts, not Korean ones. This provision reflected the asymmetrical power between the two countries and followed a trend seen in similar Western treaties with China and Japan. While it provided protection for Americans, it also undermined Korean sovereignty in its own legal system for reciprocal trade and residence rights. The treaty opened the door for American merchants and missionaries to live and work in Korea and allowed Koreans the same, though less exercised, privileges in the U.S. The agreement fostered commerce and cultural exchange, setting the stage for the first waves of U.S.-Korea interaction beyond mere diplomacy. The treaty outlined conditions under which ships could enter ports, how goods would be taxed, and how disputes could be handled. Early steps toward integrating Korea into the world economic system. 5. Prohibition of the opium trade. In a strong ethical stance, the treaty explicitly banned the trade of opium. Given the devastation that opium had caused in China, both Korea and the U.S. recognized the importance of preventing a similar crisis. This clause positioned Korea and the U.S. as partners in resisting the more exploitative aspects of global trade and imperialism. 6. Most favored nation, MFN status. The MFN clause ensured that the United States would receive any trading privileges that Korea granted to other nations in the future. This diplomatic device was common in 19th-century treaties and ensured that no other Western nation would gain a better deal. While beneficial for the U.S., the clause limited Korea's flexibility in negotiating with future powers and gradually eroded its diplomatic leverage. The broader significance of the treaty, the 1882 Shufelt Treaty, was more than a bilateral accord. It had ripple effects across the region and within Korea's internal political and social structures. 1. Korea's first treaty with a Western power. This treaty symbolized Korea's entry into the international community as a recognized sovereign state. It broke the mold of Hosei-Nura diplomacy, which had been limited to China, Japan, and a few neighboring nations. The agreement prompted a wave of similar treaties with Germany 1883, Russia 1884, France 1886, and Great Britain 1883, among others. It marked a shift from isolation to cautious engagement. 2. Diplomatic assertion of sovereignty. At a time when China still viewed Korea as a vassal state, the U.S. recognized Korea's sovereignty in the treaty, an important symbolic gesture. While Chinese officials tried to assert control over the negotiation process, Shufelt and his Korean counterparts insisted on direct negotiations. This helped strengthen Korea's international legitimacy, though China would soon push back diplomatically. 3. Cultural and educational exchange. Following the treaty, Korea sent its first official delegation to the United States in 1883, known as the Pabings. This mission sought to observe Western governance, education, industry, and military organization. The delegation visited Washington, D.C., New York, and Boston, and met with President Chester A. Arthur. This trip helped ignite early ideas about modernization within the Korean court. 4. Prelude to colonial struggles. Despite the hopeful beginnings, the treaty did not provide long-term protection for Korean sovereignty. By the 1890s, Korea became the focus of imperial competition between China, Japan, and Russia. The Treaty of Portsmouth 1905 and subsequent Japan-Korea Treaty 1910 rendered previous agreements obsolete as Japan annexed Korea. The U.S., despite its early commitment to peace and friendship, did not intervene significantly in defense of Korea's independence. Legacy of the 1882 treaty. Today, the Shufelt Treaty is remembered as a foundational moment in U.S.-Korea relations. It paved the way for over a century of diplomatic interaction, including military alliance, cultural exchange, and educational collaboration. While flawed in its asymmetrical nature, The treaty also reflected a genuine attempt to build peaceful engagement in a rapidly changing world. It laid the groundwork for the modern Korean-American alliance, even as it emerged in a very different historical context. Final thoughts. The 1882 Treaty of Peace, Amity, Commerce, and Navigation remains a defining document in Korean diplomatic history. It was a gateway to the outside world, filled with both opportunity and risk. For historians, policymakers, and anyone interested in East Asian diplomacy, the treaty is a powerful reminder of how nations enter the international system not always on equal footing, but often with a shared desire for recognition, exchange, and peace. Japanese colonial rule and World War II, Korea struggle and America's role from 1910 to 1945. The Korean Peninsula endured 35 years of Japanese colonial rule, a period marked by political repression, cultural erasure, economic exploitation, and rising resistance. While the United States did not maintain direct involvement in Korea during this time, the groundwork for future American engagement was quietly laid through Korean independence movements, diaspora activism, and shifting global power dynamics during World War II. The beginning of colonial rule. 1910 Annexation. The Japan-Korea Annexation Treaty of 1910 marked the formal beginning of colonial rule. Despite being signed under coercion and never properly ratified by the Korean people, Japan took full control of Korea's governance, land, education, and economy. Key features of this colonial period included suppression of Korean language and culture, forced labor and land appropriation, imposition of Japanese legal and educational systems, political repression through military police and secret surveillance. Though Koreans were made Japanese subjects, they were denied full rights and remained second-class citizens in their own homeland. U.S. policy. Strategic distance. Throughout this era, the United States maintained limited direct engagement with Korea. After the 1882 Shufelt Treaty, U.S. influence gradually waned, especially as Japan emerged as the dominant power in East Asia following its victory in the Russo-Japanese War 1905. In fact, in the Taft-Katsura Agreement 1905, an unofficial memorandum between U.S. Secretary of War William Howard Taft and Japanese Prime Minister Katsura Taratha, U.S. implicitly recognized Japan's interests in Korea while Japan accepted American interests in the Philippines. Though not a formal treaty, this understanding signaled U.S. acquiescence to Japanese colonial ambitions in Korea. Korean resistance and independence activism. Despite the repressive conditions, Korean resistance never ceased. Independence movements grew both domestically and abroad. 1. March 1st Movement 1919, sparked by President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points and its emphasis on self-determination. Korean intellectuals and students organized a massive peaceful protest on March 1st, 1919. Though brutally suppressed by Japanese forces, the movement galvanized global awareness of Korea's plight. To Provisional Government of the Republic of Korea in exile. Korean leaders established the Provisional Government in Shanghai 1919, with figures like Syngman Rhee lobbying the U.S. government and League of Nations for recognition of Korean sovereignty. While the U.S. never officially supported the Provisional Government, its existence helped sustain the idea of a free and independent Korea and created early diplomatic ties between Korean nationalists and American officials. 3. Korean Americans and diaspora activism. Korean immigrants in Hawaii, California, and China played a vital role in supporting independence efforts. Korean churches, newspapers, and political organizations in the U.S. raised funds, disseminated news, and lobbied U.S. politicians. Syngman Rhee, who later became South Korea's first president, was among the most prominent Korean activists in the U.S. He studied at Harvard and Princeton, and later led diplomatic missions seeking U.S. support for Korean independence. World War II, a turning point. Japan's entry into World War II following the attack on Pearl Harbor 1941 dramatically altered the political landscape. The U.S. now saw Japan not as a regional competitor but as a primary enemy. This shift reopened the Korean question, Allied planning for post-war Asia. During the war, Korean independence remained a secondary issue for the Allied powers, but it was not forgotten. Discussions at major wartime conferences shaped Korea's future. Cairo Conference 1943, the US, UK, and China issued a statement declaring that in due course, Korea shall become free and independent. Yalta Conference 1945, Korea was discussed in the context of post-war occupation with the idea of a temporary trusteeship by Allied powers. While these statements acknowledged Korean aspirations, the phrase in due course was deliberately vague. reflecting the uncertainty about how and when Korea would gain full independence. Liberation and division. On August 15, 1945, Japan surrendered, ending World War II and, with it, Japanese colonial rule in Korea. However, freedom did not come as a unified national victory. Instead, Korea was abruptly divided at the 38th parallel, with Soviet forces occupying the north and American forces the south. What was intended as a temporary military arrangement quickly hardened into ideological division, setting the stage for the Cold War on the Korean Peninsula. Legacy of colonial rule. Japanese colonial rule left deep scars that still shape Korean society, politics, and identity. Loss of sovereignty and cultural trauma. Economic disruptions followed by intense modernization under colonial constraints. Political radicalization, with many resistance fighters later forming the core leadership of North and South Korea. And while U.S. policy during the colonial era was passive, the end of World War II marked the beginning of active American involvement in Korea, one that would deepen during the Korean War 1950 to 1953, and evolve into a long-standing military and political alliance. Final thoughts. The period of Japanese colonial rule and World War II was a time of suffering and resistance for Korea, but also one of transformation. Korean nationalists, often overlooked in Western narratives, tirelessly worked to preserve identity, seek justice, and appeal to the world's conscience. Though U.S. support during the colonial period was limited, Korean activists planted seeds of a future alliance. Those seeds would grow rapidly in the aftermath of the war, leading to a complex, enduring relationship between Korea and the United States, one rooted in shared values of sovereignty, democracy, and resilience. Post-World War II division and the establishment of South Korea, a nation split by superpowers. The end of World War II in 1945 brought with it the long-awaited liberation of Korea from 35 years of Japanese colonial rule. However, freedom came with a profound and unexpected cost. Division. What was intended as a short-term, administrative solution quickly hardened into a permanent geopolitical fracture, birthing two separate Koreas that remain divided to this day. Division at the 38th parallel. A temporary line becomes a permanent border. In the waning days of World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union, wartime allies turned ideological rivals, made a hasty decision to divide the Korean peninsula along the 38th parallel north. This division was not the result of any Korean political process, but a strategic military arrangement agreed upon with minimal consultation of Korean leaders. Soviet forces entered Korea from the north, accepting the surrender of Japanese troops above the 38th parallel. American forces arrived from the south, taking control of the lower half of the peninsula. At the time, the division was described as temporary, with the understanding that Korea would eventually be unified under a single, independent government. But the Cold War quickly changed everything. Cold War tensions cement the divide. Attempts at joint US-Soviet trusteeship over Korea faltered due to growing ideological differences. The Soviets began building a communist regime in the north, while the US supported a capitalist and democratic government in the south. Political reconciliation became increasingly unlikely as Korean communists, backed by the USSR, solidified control in the north. Anti-communist factions, supported by the US, gained power in the south. Negotiations through the US-Soviet Joint Commission 1946 to 1947 collapsed over disagreements about which Korean political groups were legitimate. By 1948, the peninsula was irrevocably split, not just administratively, but ideologically. Creation of two Koreas. A nation divided with unification efforts deadlocked. Both the US and the Soviet Union pushed for the establishment of separate governments in their respective zones. Republic of Korea ROK. South Korea proclaimed on August 15, 1948, in the US-occupied zone. Syngman Rhee, a longtime independence activist and US-educated political leader, was elected as the first president of South Korea, backed by the United States. The ROK was recognized as the sole legitimate government of Korea by most Western nations. The establishment of the Republic of Korea represented the formal beginning of the South Korean state, built on democratic ideals but heavily influenced by US strategic and political interests. Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, North Korea proclaimed on September 9, 1948. In the Soviet-occupied zone, led by Kim Il-sung, a guerrilla fighter and Soviet protege, who would become the supreme leader of North Korea, the Soviet Union and its allies, recognized the DPRK as the legitimate government of all Korea, Both governments claimed to represent the entire Korean peninsula, further escalating tensions and making peaceful reunification increasingly unlikely. U.S. recognition and support. From the outset, the United States recognized the Republic of Korea, South Korea, as the only lawful government on the peninsula. American support was political, military, and economic, laying the foundation for a lasting bilateral relationship. In 1949, the U.S. withdrew most of its troops but continued to provide economic aid and military advisors. The U.S. viewed South Korea as a key ally in the global fight against communism, especially as tensions with the Soviet Union and China escalated. This support would intensify dramatically in just a year, with the outbreak of the Korean War. In 1950, though the U.S. had little involvement in Korea during the colonial era, its post-war role was decisive in shaping the future of the South. America's support of Syngman Rhee and the ROC government helped establish a non-communist foothold in Northeast Asia, but also committed the U.S. to the region's ongoing conflicts and complexities. The lasting impact of the 1948 division, the division of Korea at the 38th parallel, is one of the most enduring legacies of the early Cold War. It was not born from Korean consensus, but from external superpower interests, with Koreans on both sides caught in the ideological crossfire. Key consequences include the Korean War 1950 to 1953, which further entrenched division and resulted in millions of deaths. The creation of two contrasting political systems, authoritarian communism in the north and US-backed democracy in the south. The enduring military standoff at the Demilitarized Zone (DMZ), one of the most fortified borders in the world. Long-term family separations, human rights issues, and geopolitical instability. Final thoughts. The post-World War II division of Korea and the establishment of two rival states were among the most consequential events of the 20th century. What began as a temporary military arrangement evolved into a geopolitical reality that persists today. For South Korea, the U.S. role was foundational. The support extended during this transitional period helped build the framework for a democratic nation, though not without challenges, authoritarian phases, and internal strife. As we reflect on this period, it's important to remember that the division of Korea was not inevitable. It was the result of decisions made in foreign capitals, not by the Korean people. Yet the resilience of the Korean nation, especially the rise of South Korea as a global democratic power, is a testament to the strength of a people long divided but never broken. The Korean War and the birth of the U.S. South Korea military alliance. The outbreak of the Korean War in 1950 was a watershed moment, not only for the Korean Peninsula but for the entire Cold War era. It marked the first significant armed conflict between communist and democratic forces and solidified the United States' long-term military commitment to South Korea. What began as a civil war quickly escalated into a global conflict, drawing in powerful nations and reshaping the strategic balance of East Asia. Out of this crucible, the U.S.-South Korea military alliance was born, a partnership that continues to define regional security to this day. Outbreak and course of the war. North Korea invades. June 25, 1950. At dawn on June 25, 1950, North Korean troops, backed by the Soviet Union and later China, crossed the 38th parallel in a surprise attack. Their goal was swift reunification of the Korean peninsula under communist rule. The Republic of Korea, South Korea, militarily weak and ill-prepared, was quickly overwhelmed. In just days, North Korean forces captured Seoul and pushed South Korean and U.S. troops to the Pusan perimeter, a small defensive pocket in the southeast. U.S. and UN response. The United States, under President Harry S. Truman, saw the invasion as a direct challenge to the post-World War to international order, and a test of U.S. resolve in containing communism. Under the banner of the United Nations Command, UNC, the U.S. led a 16-nation coalition to defend South Korea. Notably, this marked the first military action of the newly formed United Nations, legitimizing collective international security responses under U.S. leadership. Key turning points in the war. 1. Defense of the Pusan perimeter. August-September 1950. The South Korean and U.S. forces, heavily outnumbered and under constant assault, managed to hold the line at the Pusan perimeter. This defensive stand bought time for reinforcements and supplies to arrive. Without this successful defense, the entire Korean peninsula might have fallen to communist control. 2. The Incheon landing. September 15, 1950. One of the war's most dramatic moments came with Operation Chromite, led by General Douglas MacArthur. In a bold amphibious assault, UN forces landed at Incheon, a port city near Seoul, far behind enemy lines. The landing cut off North Korean supply routes. Seoul was recaptured within weeks. North Korean troops were pushed back past the 38th parallel. The victory at Incheon reversed the momentum of the war and gave hope for a unified, democratic Korea. 3. Chinese intervention and the Chosin Reservoir. Late 1950. As UN forces advanced toward the Yalu River, which borders China, the Chinese government warned against continued incursion. When ignored, hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops launched a massive counteroffensive in October 1950. One of the most brutal battles was the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir, where US Marines and UN forces were encircled in freezing conditions. Despite overwhelming odds, they executed a fighting withdrawal, earning the nickname the Chosin Few. The war again shifted in favor of communist forces. By early 1951, the front lines had stabilized near the 38th parallel, and the war devolved into a grinding stalemate. Human and material costs. The Korean War was a human tragedy of staggering proportions. Over 3 million people were killed or wounded, most of them Korean civilians. Entire cities, including Seoul, were reduced to rubble. Families were permanently separated, a trauma still felt today. For the US, it was a major commitment. Over 36,000 American troops died. The war spurred massive defense spending and intensified Cold War militarization. The armistice, an unfinished war after 2 years of bloody stalemate and failed peace negotiations. An armistice agreement was finally signed on July 27, 1953, at Panmunjom. Key outcomes. The Korean peninsula remained divided at the 38th parallel. A demilitarized zone, DMZ, was established as a buffer. No formal peace treaty was ever signed. The war is technically still ongoing. The armistice also included the establishment of the Military Armistice Commission, co-chaired by both sides, and a neutral nations supervisory commission to monitor ceasefire violations. The birth of the US-ROK military alliance. In the wake of the war, the United States and South Korea realized the need for permanent military cooperation to prevent further aggression. Mutual Defense Treaty. October 1, 1953, shortly after the armistice, the US and South Korea signed the Mutual Defense Treaty, which remains in force to this day. Key provisions include mutual commitment to defend each other in case of external attack, continued stationing of US troops in South Korea, primarily along the DMZ, integration of South Korea into US strategic defense planning in Asia. This treaty marked the formal beginning of the US-South Korea military alliance, which would become one of the most enduring and strategically significant in the world. Strategic and political consequences for South Korea. The war devastated the country, but US support helped rebuild its military, infrastructure, and government. South Korea evolved from a war-torn nation to an emerging economic power and democracy, thanks in part to US aid and security guarantees. For the United States, the war signaled America's long-term military presence in East Asia. It reinforced the doctrine of containment and led to the militarization of Cold War policy. It marked the beginning of America's Asia pivot, which would grow in importance over the coming decades. Final thoughts. The Korean War 1950-1953 was not only a military conflict, it was the birthplace of the modern US-South Korea alliance. Forged in the crucible of war, the partnership has endured through decades of shifting politics, economic change, and regional threats. Though the war ended in a stalemate, the legacy of US involvement shaped South Korea. Its trajectory from a devastated battlefield to a thriving democratic nation and key US ally. And while peace remains elusive, the alliance forged during the Korean War continues to play a central role in maintaining stability on the peninsula and beyond. The 1953 Mutual Defense Treaty, cornerstone of the US-South Korea alliance in the aftermath of the Korean War. South Korea lay in ruins, its infrastructure shattered, its population traumatized, and its political future uncertain. Amid the rubble, a pivotal agreement was signed that would shape the trajectory of the peninsula and US foreign policy in East Asia for decades to come. The 1953 Mutual Defense Treaty between the United States and the Republic of Korea (ROK), signed on October 1, 1953, just 2 months after the Korean War armistice. The treaty was more than a symbolic gesture of solidarity, was a strategic and binding commitment to collective security, regional stability, and long-term cooperation. It marked the beginning of one of the most enduring and effective military alliances in the post-World War II era. Key provisions of the treaty. The Mutual Defense Treaty laid the foundation for a formal security alliance between South Korea and the United States. Its core elements include 1. Mutual defense commitment. The treaty commits both nations to consult and act together in the event of an external armed attack on either party in the Pacific area. Each party recognizes that an armed attack in the Pacific area on either of the parties would be dangerous to its own peace and safety, and declares that it would act to meet the common danger. Article 3. Mutual Defense Treaty. This clause closely mirrors the collective defense language of NATO's Article 5, signaling a serious and credible U.S. commitment to South Korea's security. 2. Stationing of U.S. forces. The treaty authorized the continued presence of U.S. military forces in South Korea. In practice, this meant establishment of permanent U.S. military bases, especially near the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, long-term deployment of U.S. ground, air, and naval units on South Korean soil, integration of the U.S. military into Korean defense planning. This permanent presence not only deterred North Korean aggression, but also served broader U.S. strategic interests in the region. 3. Framework for ongoing military cooperation. The treaty formalized a structure for military consultation, joint training, information sharing, and defense coordination. Over time, this evolved into regular combined military exercises like Foal, Eagle, Ulchi, Freedom Guardian, and Team Spirit. Establishment of the United States Forces Korea USFK Command. Creation of the ROK U.S. Combined Forces Command, CFC, in 1970 ATA binational military headquarters responsible for wartime operations. These mechanisms ensured that the two militaries remained closely linked in strategy, readiness, and interoperability. Why the treaty was and is so important. 1. A lifeline for post-war South Korea in 1953. South Korea faced a precarious future. The country had barely survived invasion, endured mass destruction, and remained under the shadow of renewed war. The Mutual Defense Treaty provided security guarantees that deterred further North Korean aggression, helped stabilize the political landscape by giving the ROK international legitimacy and U.S. backing, allowed South Korea to focus on reconstruction and development, knowing that the U.S. was committed to its defense. 2. A strategic outpost for the U.S. For the United States, the treaty cemented its role as a Pacific power during the Cold War, created a military foothold on the Asian mainland, counterbalancing China and the Soviet Union, demonstrated U.S. willingness to support anti-communist allies through long-term commitments. The alliance with South Korea became a template for U.S. strategy in Asia, alongside partnerships with Japan, the Philippines, and later Taiwan and Thailand. 3. A long-term alliance, not just a wartime pact. Unlike temporary coalitions, the U.S.-ROK alliance endured and deepened long after the Korean War. The Mutual Defense Treaty survived changes in leadership, domestic politics, and global strategy, adapted to new threats, including nuclear proliferation and cyber warfare, became a platform for broader cooperation beyond the military, spanning economics, diplomacy, education, and technology. Enduring relevance in the 21st century. More than 70 years later, the Mutual Defense Treaty remains a pillar of regional security. Despite major shifts in the global order, the agreement has held firm through North Korea's nuclear development, including repeated missile tests and threats, shifts in U.S. administrations, from Eisenhower to Biden, each reaffirming the alliance, debates over defense cost-sharing and troop presence, which occasionally strain but never break the partnership. As of today, about 28,500 U.S. troops are stationed in South Korea. The Combined Forces Command CFC continues to oversee joint military readiness. The treaty is frequently reaffirmed during high-level diplomatic visits and defense summits. Final thoughts. The 1953 Mutual Defense Treaty is more than a historical document. It's a living framework that has shaped the security architecture of Northeast Asia and preserved peace on one of the world's most volatile borders. For South Korea, it represents an ironclad commitment from a global superpower. For the United States, it is a testament to the value of steadfast alliances grounded in mutual interest, trust, and shared sacrifice. In a world where alliances are often tested and questioned, the U.S. South Korea Defense Treaty stands out as a model of strategic endurance and bilateral resilience, a cornerstone not only of Korean security but of American engagement in Asia. US Forces Korea USFK, the backbone of deterrence and defense since the end of the Korean War. The presence of U.S. military forces on the Korean peninsula has served as a vital element of deterrence, regional stability, and the broader US-ROC security alliance. Central to this presence is U.S. Forces Korea (USFK), a unified command structure that has operated continuously for over 7 decades. Established in 1957, USFK represents not just a military deployment, but a strategic and symbolic commitment to South Korea's defense in the face of persistent threats from North Korea. The role of U.S. Forces Korea 1, a permanent forward deployment. At its peak during the Cold War, over 60,000 U.S. troops were stationed in South Korea. While the number has since stabilized, the commitment remains strong, with around 28,500 troops currently deployed. These forces are stationed at various strategic locations across the peninsula, including Camp Humphreys Pyeongtaek, the largest U.S. overseas military base, serving as the new USFK headquarters; Ozon Air Base, a key hub for U.S. air power and intelligence operations; Camp Casey and Camp Red Cloud, historically important bases near the DMZ, now largely relocated. The presence of these troops acts as a tripwire deterrent. Any attack on South Korea would automatically involve U.S. forces, signaling that aggression would lead to a broader conflict. 2. The 2nd Infantry Division, a crucial deterrent force. Among the most well-known units in South Korea is the U.S. Army's 2nd Infantry Division 2ID, also known as the Warrior Division. The 2ID has been a frontline deterrent force since the Korean War armistice, stationed near the Demilitarized Zone (DMZ) for decades. It played a pivotal role in defending against potential North Korean aggression. Today, the division operates as a combined U.S. ROC unit, known as the 2nd Infantry Division ROC U.S. Combined Division RUSTI, a unique model of integrated military cooperation. This combined structure strengthens interoperability and reflects the evolution of the alliance from a U.S.-led effort to a true military partnership. 3. Joint military exercises. Readiness and coordination, a key component of the U.S. ROC alliance, has been regular joint military exercises designed to ensure readiness and cohesion between the two forces. Major exercises include Ulchi Freedom Shield UFS, a large-scale command post exercise simulating various wartime scenarios; Fall Eagle and Key Resolve, historical combined field and command exercises aimed at improving operational coordination; Vigilant Storm, an air-focused joint exercise responding to rising tensions. These drills ensure both forces can respond rapidly and effectively to North Korean provocations, serve as a strategic message of deterrence to Pyongyang, enhance trust, coordination, and mutual understanding between us and South Korean troops. While some exercises have been scaled back or paused during diplomatic efforts with North Korea, they remain a core part of the alliance's readiness strategy. Beyond deterrence, humanitarian and regional roles, USFK also contributes to disaster relief and humanitarian assistance, for example, flood or earthquake responses; regional stability, working with allies like Japan, Australia, and the Philippines; counter-proliferation and missile defense, addressing regional threats such as North Korea's evolving nuclear arsenal; the deployment of systems like THAAD, Terminal High-Altitude Area Defense, in 2017 reflected the U.S. ROC alliance's adaptation to new security challenges, including missile threats and cyber warfare, symbol of enduring commitment. The continued presence of US Forces Korea is more than a matter of military strategy. It is a powerful symbol of the United States' enduring commitment to the defense of South Korea and the maintenance of peace in Northeast Asia. Despite domestic debates in both countries ranging from troop cost-sharing disputes to anti-base sentiment, the majority of both Americans and South Koreans continue to support the alliance, recognizing that USFK helps deter war, promotes peace through strength, and ensures a free and prosperous Korean peninsula. Final thoughts. US Forces Korea has stood guard for more than 70 years, watching over the DMZ, training side by side with South Korean forces, and evolving with the changing nature of modern warfare. It has become one of the most integrated and capable military alliances in the world. As geopolitical tensions rise across the Indo-Pacific, USFK's role remains as critical as ever, not just for South Korea's security, but for regional stability, U.S. strategic interests, and the defense of democratic values in East Asia. Economic and political developments. From ruin to resilience in the wake of the Korean War, South Korea was a nation shattered, its cities bombed, its economy virtually non-existent, and its people living in deep poverty. Yet within just a few decades, South Korea underwent one of the most remarkable transformations in modern history. This rapid economic and political rise, often referred to as the miracle on the Han River, was enabled by South Korea's resilience, strategic vision, and critically, its enduring alliance with the United States. The miracle on the Han River, from aid to autonomy, named after the Han River, which flows through Seoul. The miracle describes South Korea's dramatic transformation from a war-torn country in the 1950s to a leading global economy by the 1990s. U.S. contributions to South Korea's economic rise, while the Korean people were the main drivers of their own success. The U.S. played a foundational role in supporting this transformation through 1. Economic aid. Between the 1950s and 1970s, the U.S. provided billions of dollars in aid, including food assistance, especially during famines in the 1950s, infrastructure rebuilding, including roads, ports, and factories, financial support for government institutions, education, and healthcare. This aid helped stabilize the economy, laying the groundwork for long-term growth. 2. Technology and knowledge transfer. The U.S. facilitated access to advanced industrial technology and know-how, training programs for Korean engineers, managers, and policymakers. The growth of state-owned and private enterprises, especially in heavy industry, American institutions, from universities to corporations, contributed to modernizing South Korea's workforce and industrial base. 3. Market access and trade. The U.S. opened its markets to Korean exports, enabling rapid growth of key sectors like textiles, electronics, and automobiles. The rise of global conglomerates such as Samsung, Hyundai, and LG. Diversification of the Korean economy into global supply chains. As a result, South Korea transitioned from an aid recipient to a competitive export economy within a generation. Political transformation from authoritarianism to democracy alongside economic growth. South Korea experienced a complex political evolution. For much of the Cold War, South Korea was ruled by military-backed authoritarian regimes, often with tacit U.S. support in the name of anti-communism. However, South Korea's people fought hard for democracy, and the U.S., over time, aligned itself with these democratic aspirations. Key milestones. April Revolution 1960. A student-led uprising toppled the authoritarian First Republic. Gwangju Uprising 1980. Brutally suppressed by the military, it later became a symbol of the democratic movement. June Democratic Uprising 1987. Mass protests forced the government to hold direct presidential elections, beginning South Korea's modern democratic era. Throughout this political evolution, the U.S. played a dual role, at times supporting stability over democracy during the Cold War, later championing human rights and democratic reforms, especially from the late 1980s onward. Today, South Korea is a vibrant democracy and a key advocate of democratic values, globally a transformation strongly shaped by the alliance's evolution. Expansion beyond security. A comprehensive partnership. As South Korea stabilized and matured, the U.S.-ROC alliance evolved beyond its original security framework into a multifaceted partnership spanning economics, diplomacy, culture, and education. 1. Economic cooperation and trade. South Korea became a key U.S. trading partner and one of Asia's most advanced economies. In 2012, the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement, Chorus FTA, was implemented, reducing tariffs and expanding bilateral trade. The U.S. is now South Korea's second-largest trading partner. While South Korea is one of America's top 10 export markets, despite occasional disputes over auto imports, steel tariffs, or digital trade, economic cooperation remains robust and mutually beneficial. 2. Political and diplomatic collaboration. Both countries closely coordinate on regional security, particularly regarding North Korea's nuclear program. South Korea contributes to global peacekeeping, climate action, and humanitarian efforts, often alongside the U.S. Regular high-level summits and 2+2 meetings, defense and foreign ministers, reinforce policy alignment. South Korea is no longer just a U.S. ally in Asia, it is a global diplomatic partner. 3. Cultural and educational exchange. Tens of thousands of Korean students study in the U.S. annually, fostering long-term connections. US institutions collaborate with South Korean universities on science, engineering, and research. Korean culture, from K-pop to Korean cinema, has found a massive audience in the U.S. While American pop culture remains hugely influential in Korea, these cultural exchanges have deepened mutual understanding and helped make the alliance popular at the societal level, not just among policymakers. A resilient alliance despite challenges like any long-term relationship. The US-South Korea alliance has experienced moments of tension, trade friction over market access and intellectual property rights, debates over defense cost-sharing, particularly during US administrations seeking to reduce overseas military expenditures, public protests in South Korea over specific US policies or troop-related incidents. Yet, each time, the alliance has proven remarkably durable, grounded in shared interests, mutual respect, and deep institutional ties. Final thoughts. The US-South Korea alliance was born in war, but it matured through peace, progress, and partnership. From the ruins of the 1950s to the global stage of the 21st century, the two nations have evolved into economic powerhouses, democratic allies, and cultural bridges. The miracle on the Han River is more than a story of economic development. It is a testament to what resilient alliances, paired with national resolve, can achieve. As South Korea continues to rise on the world stage, its bond with the United States remains a foundation for mutual growth, shared values, and lasting peace in a complex and changing world. Contemporary relations, a comprehensive partnership for a new era. The US-South Korea alliance, once forged in the crucible of war, has grown far beyond its military origins. Today, it stands as a comprehensive and adaptive partnership that addresses a wide spectrum of challenges, from traditional defense issues to emerging global threats. In a rapidly changing geopolitical environment, the alliance has evolved and expanded, demonstrating its resilience, relevance, and readiness to meet the demands of the 21st century. Adapting to new challenges. 1. North Korea's evolving threat. Deterrence and dialogue. North Korea remains the central security concern for both Washington and Seoul. Over the past 2 decades, the regime has conducted multiple nuclear tests, 6 to date, developed increasingly sophisticated ballistic missile capabilities, including ICBMs potentially capable of reaching the US mainland, engaged in cyber attacks and provocations, further destabilizing the region. In response, the alliance has strengthened its deterrence posture, enhanced joint military readiness, revival and expansion of joint drills, such as Ulchi Freedom Shield, increased interoperability between US and ROK forces, deployment of strategic assets like nuclear-capable bombers and stealth fighters during exercises. Nuclear deterrence dialogue. In 2023, the Washington Declaration reaffirmed extended U.S. nuclear deterrence to South Korea. The establishment of a Nuclear Consultative Group (NCG) has enhanced planning and communication regarding nuclear threats. The U.S. has committed to greater visibility of its strategic assets, for example, submarine deployments, in the region to bolster deterrence. At the same time, both nations maintain a dual-track approach, remaining open to dialogue and diplomacy with North Korea, while keeping a robust defense posture in place. 2. Responding to regional shifts. China and trilateral cooperation. The Indo-Pacific has become the focal point of global strategic competition, particularly with the rise of China as a regional and global power. The US-South Korea alliance has increasingly adapted to broader regional dynamics beyond the Korean peninsula, addressing China's assertiveness while South Korea seeks to balance economic ties with China and its strategic alliance with the US. It has grown more aligned with Washington on issues like freedom of navigation, Taiwan Strait stability, and supply chain security. Joint statements have emphasized the rules-based international order, implicitly responding to Chinese maritime expansion and coercive tactics. Trilateral cooperation with Japan. The U.S. has prioritized strengthening trilateral cooperation among the U.S., South Korea, and Japan, 2 of its closest allies in Asia. After years of strained Seoul-Tokyo relations, recent diplomatic breakthroughs, for example, the 2023 Camp David Summit, have enabled real-time intelligence sharing through trilateral mechanisms, coordinated responses to North Korean missile launches, joint naval and missile defense exercises in the region. Trilateralism adds strategic depth to the US-ROK alliance and enhances its ability to address regional flashpoints and cross-border threats. 3. Non-traditional security issues. Broadening the alliance agenda. Modern alliances must address more than tanks and missiles. The US-ROK partnership now engages in a wide range of non-traditional security domains critical to national and global well-being. Cybersecurity. Both countries face persistent cyber threats from North Korea and other actors. Joint cyber exercises, information sharing agreements, and public-private collaboration aim to harden infrastructure and defend against attacks on banking, defense, and critical systems. Climate change. The alliance is actively promoting clean energy cooperation, including hydrogen and nuclear energy collaboration, joint research on green technology and carbon neutrality. South Korea's Green New Deal and the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act offer new opportunities for climate-aligned industrial policy and cooperation. Public health and pandemic response. COVID-19 underscored the need for global health cooperation. The U.S. and South Korea worked closely on vaccine development, distribution, and medical supply chains. Future plans include establishing global health security hubs and strengthening biosecurity frameworks. The alliance as a global partnership, no longer confined to Northeast Asia. The U.S.-South Korea alliance is becoming a global strategic partnership. South Korea is increasingly participating in multilateral peacekeeping operations, providing development assistance to Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, cooperating with the U.S. on space exploration, emerging technologies, and AI governance. In 2022, South Korea joined NATO's Cyber Defense Center as a contributing participant, and in 2023, it announced its Indo-Pacific strategy, aligned with US objectives on maritime security, economic openness, and democratic governance. Final thoughts as we look at the contemporary state of US-South Korea relations. It's clear that the alliance has transcended its Cold War origins. It is no longer just a security arrangement for the Korean peninsula. It is a comprehensive, flexible, and forward-looking partnership that guards against military threats, promotes economic prosperity, defends democratic values, and tackles transnational challenges. In an era defined by strategic uncertainty and global interdependence, the U.S.'s ROC alliance stands out as a model of adaptability, trust, and shared purpose, ready not only to respond to crises, but to shape a more peaceful, secure, and sustainable future. Challenges and resilience. Navigating tensions. Reinforcing trust. No alliance, no matter how long-standing or strategically important, is immune to challenges. Over the decades, the U.S.-South Korea alliance has encountered numerous diplomatic, political, and strategic hurdles. Yet, what sets this alliance apart is its resilience, its ability to adapt, recalibrate, and emerge stronger. The relationship has been tested, sometimes strained, but never broken. Its ability to withstand pressure is a testament to the depth of mutual interests, shared values, and institutional strength that bind Washington and Seoul together. 1. Policy differences over North Korea. North Korea remains the central friction point in the alliance's strategic agenda. However, US and South Korean administrations have not always agreed on the best approach. Some South Korean leaders have prioritized engagement and reconciliation with the North, for example, the Sunshine Policy or recent inter-Korean summits. In contrast, US policy has often focused on maximum pressure, denuclearization demands, and military deterrence. These differences have occasionally led to disagreements on joint exercises or sanctions, divergent messaging in negotiations with Pyongyang, domestic political backlash in both countries. Nevertheless, both sides have repeatedly aligned their approaches when necessary, demonstrating flexibility and commitment to shared security goals. 2. Burden-sharing disputes. The question of who pays for U.S. troops stationed in South Korea has been a recurring issue in alliance negotiations. The U.S. seeks increased host nation support to offset the cost of maintaining forces. South Korea has historically covered a substantial portion, including base construction, for example, Camp Humphreys, personnel salaries, logistics, and infrastructure. Tensions peaked during certain U.S. administrations that demanded sharp cost increases, sparking prolonged negotiations over special measures agreements, SMAs. Public protests in South Korea, concerns over alliance stability. Each time, the two countries ultimately reached agreements, proving that negotiated compromise and long-term strategic vision continue to outweigh short-term fiscal disagreements. 3. South Korea's strategic balancing act with China. South Korea faces a delicate geopolitical dilemma, maintaining its security alliance with the U.S. while preserving its deep economic ties with China, its largest trading partner. This balancing act has produced friction, especially in areas like THAAD missile deployment 2016, which triggered economic retaliation from China. South Korea's hesitance to fully align with U.S. Indo-Pacific strategies, such as freedom of navigation operations or statements on Taiwan. Caution in joining anti-China coalitions, including technology export controls or military coalitions. Yet, Seoul has gradually grown more assertive in defending its strategic autonomy and democratic values. While reaffirming its long-term alignment with Washington, the alliance has endured by recognizing the regional complexities South Korea must navigate, without demanding rigid conformity. For domestic political changes and diverging priorities, both countries have undergone significant political shifts that influence alliance priorities. In South Korea, progressive and conservative administrations often adopt contrasting approaches to North Korea, China, and the U.S. Domestic protests sometimes reflect concerns over U.S. military presence, environmental impact, or sovereignty. In the United States, shifts between administrations, for example, Obama gives Trump, gives Biden, have produced varying levels of emphasis on alliance multilateralism, cost-sharing disputes, engagement with North Korea despite leadership changes. The alliance has survived and even thrived by being institutionalized through the Mutual Defense Treaty, joint military structures like the Combined Forces Command, long-standing public and elite support in both countries, a resilient and adaptive alliance. Despite these challenges, the U.S.-South Korea alliance continues to prove its durability and adaptability. It has modernized to meet new threats. From missiles to malware, it has diversified to include economics, technology, and climate. It has deepened through cultural, educational, and diplomatic ties. Rather than weakening under pressure, the alliance has consistently evolved, absorbing tensions without unraveling. Final thoughts: the true test of an alliance is not how well it performs when times are easy, but how resilient it remains when tested. The U.S.-South Korea alliance has faced Cold War crises, regional provocations, political disagreements, and global upheaval, and through it all, it has remained a pillar of peace, stability, and progress in East Asia. As the world enters an era of strategic competition and global uncertainty, the alliance continues to serve not just as a defense pact, but as a dynamic partnership committed to freedom, prosperity, and cooperation. Its resilience ensures that it will remain a linchpin of regional security and global collaboration for generations to come. Human dimension and legacy. Stories that bind a nation and its ally, while treaties, policies, and military strategies form the backbone of U.S.-South Korea relations. The true soul of the alliance is found in the people who lived it. Soldiers who fought side by side, families separated and then reunited, diplomats who navigated history, civilians who endured war, rebuilt from ashes, and forged friendships across cultures. These human stories bring the alliance to life, transforming abstract terms like deterrence or strategic partnership into narratives of sacrifice, cooperation, and lasting connection. Bonds forged in war. American and Korean soldiers. The Korean War left millions dead or displaced, but it also built an enduring legacy of mutual respect between U.S. and South Korean service members. American veterans often speak of the harsh winters at the Chosin Reservoir, where Korean civilians helped evacuate wounded soldiers. Korean War orphans were taken in by American military families or adopted abroad, forming lifelong trans-Pacific ties. Joint memorials and yearly remembrance events honor those who never returned, keeping their sacrifices alive in collective memory. For many American veterans, South Korea is no longer just a battlefield. It's a prosperous, grateful nation they helped protect, and one that continues to honor their service. Civilian cooperation and cultural exchange, rebuilding together. After the war, thousands of Americans, missionaries, aid workers, Peace Corps, volunteers, engineers, and educators came to South Korea to help rebuild. They taught in schools, built infrastructure, and offered medical services. South Koreans remember these efforts not just as assistance, but as acts of solidarity during a time of immense hardship. Many South Koreans who grew up during that period have become leaders in business, academia, and government, and credit these early exchanges with opening their world. Education and exchange. Generations of South Korean students have studied in the United States, many on U.S. government scholarships. Likewise, thousands of Americans have lived and worked in Korea as English teachers, researchers, and business professionals. These experiences have created cross-cultural marriages and friendships. Bilingual, bicultural families, a community of individuals deeply invested in the future of both nations. Today's alliance is not just maintained by diplomats and generals, it is lived daily by ordinary people who speak both languages, understand both histories, and cherish both flags. Diplomats, peace builders, and bridge builders throughout decades of rapid change and occasional tension. U.S. and Korean diplomats have worked quietly, and sometimes heroically, behind the scenes. The 1994 nuclear crisis was diffused in part through painstaking diplomacy. The 2018 to 2019 summits between North Korea and the US were made possible by Korean diplomats mediating between cultures and expectations. Everyday embassy staff, interpreters, and cultural liaisons play a crucial role in building trust and resolving misunderstanding. These diplomatic efforts, while less visible than military parades or state visits, form the enduring architecture of peace and cooperation. Living memorials and shared memory. Both countries have worked to preserve the memory of their shared history through memorials and museums, for example, the Korean War Memorial in Washington, D.C. and the War Memorial of Korea in Seoul. Veteran reunions and honor flights, student programs that bring young Americans and Koreans together to study the alliance's history. These initiatives ensure that the lessons and human costs of conflict and cooperation are never forgotten. Even as generations change, a living legacy, perhaps the greatest legacy of us South Korea relations, is that a war which could have permanently divided two peoples instead became the starting point of an alliance defined by human connection. From the first handshake at the 1882 Shufelt Treaty, to the shared trenches of 1950, to the bustling campuses, factories, and embassies of today, the relationship has been shaped as much by people as by policy. Final thoughts. The human stories of courage, compassion, learning, and loss are not just footnotes in the alliance's history, they are its foundation. They remind us that behind every treaty and troop deployment are people trying to do what is right, often under extraordinary circumstances, as both nations look to the future, navigating global challenges and regional tensions. It is this human bond that will ensure the alliance not only endures, but thrives. Visualizing the relationship, images that tell the story of the US-South Korea alliance history, comes alive not only through words and treaties, but through the power of visual storytelling. From faded photographs of 19th-century diplomats to modern satellite imagery of joint military drills, visual materials play a crucial role in documenting, preserving, and teaching the story of us South Korea relations. These images provide a window into pivotal moments, human experiences, and cultural exchanges that shaped one of the most enduring alliances in modern history. 1. 19th-century encounters and early diplomacy. Archival documents. The original 1882 Treaty of Peace, Amity, Commerce, and Navigations, signed by U.S. Envoy Commodore Robert Shufelt, and officials of the Joseon dynasties, preserved in both Korean and English. Handwritten letters, diplomatic seals, and early maps show how Korea first engaged with the Western world. Historic maps and illustrations. 19th-century Western maps depict Korea as the Hermit Kingdom, offering insight into how the West perceived East Asia. Early American expeditions to Korea, such as the 1871 Shinmyeongu U.S. expedition to Ganghwa Island, are captured in etchings and field sketches, revealing the military and cultural tensions of the era. 2. The Korean War in images. Wartime photography. Iconic photos like the Incheon landing in 1950 or the brutal conditions at the Chosin Reservoir bring the Korean War's intensity to life. Images of refugees, orphaned children, and civilian devastation highlight the human cost of the conflict. Media coverage and propaganda. American and Korean newspapers, Life magazine spreads, and military propaganda posters show how the war was represented to domestic audiences and the world. These visuals shaped public opinion and international support for South Korea during its darkest hour. 3. Post-war reconstruction and transformation. Images of rebuilding. Photos from the 1960s and 1970s show U.S. aid workers, Peace Corps volunteers, and Korean students reflecting the rebuilding of South Korea with American support. Comparative visuals of Seoul in 1953 versus 2025 illustrate the stunning miracle on the Han River. Cultural and educational exchange. Graduation photos, Fulbright ceremonies, and images of American professors and Korean students reflect intellectual and cultural bridges, built through education and diplomacy. For modern alliance activities, joint military exercises, high-resolution imagery from exercises like Ulchi Freedom Shield or Fall Eagle shows advanced interoperability and the scale of modern combined operations. Drone and satellite photos offer strategic perspectives of defense postures near the DMZ, naval coordination, and missile defense systems. Summits and state visits, visuals of U.S. presidents meeting South Korean leaders, Reagan with Chen Duhon, Clinton with Kim Dae-jung, Biden with Yoon Suk-yeol symbolize decades of evolving partnership. Ceremonial guards, joint press conferences, and shared declarations captured on camera tell the story of political solidarity in a visual language. 5. Art museums and memorials. Commemorative art murals, war memorials, and monuments in both countries honor shared sacrifice, such as the Korean War Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., and the Statue of Brothers in Seoul. These works humanize history, evoking emotion and reflection for future generations. Museums and exhibits. Institutions like the War Memorial of Korea and the Smithsonian Institution house rich collections of photographs, uniforms, letters, and personal items from soldiers and diplomats. Digital archives and virtual exhibits allow global audiences to engage with Alliance history in immersive ways. 6. Educational value and public understanding. Classroom tools and public outreach. Visual materials are used in textbooks, museums, university lectures, and documentaries to educate younger generations. Archival digitization projects and multimedia timelines offer interactive learning for students, researchers, and the general public. Seeing the Alliance through new lenses. Documentaries, historical reenactments, and digital storytelling projects like oral histories paired with visuals are helping people connect emotionally with the past. Social media campaigns by embassies and veterans. Groups use photos and videos to keep the Alliance visible in the public consciousness. Final thoughts. Visual materials are more than records, they are living memory. They allow us to witness the evolution of US-South Korea ties across generations. Remember those who sacrificed to defend freedom. Inspire future collaboration by showcasing the real, human face of the Alliance. As we move deeper into the digital age, preserving, sharing, and teaching through these images will ensure that the Alliance is not only remembered, but understood and valued by all. Conclusion. From historic ties to a future-focused alliance, the US-South Korea relationship, now spanning well over a century, is a testament to how shared values, mutual respect, and adaptability can turn a distant diplomatic agreement into one of the most robust and multifaceted alliances in the world. What began with the 1882 Treaty of Peace, Amity, Commerce, and Navigation, Korea's first treaty with a Western power, has evolved into a strategic partnership of global consequence. Through war, recovery, modernization, and regional transformation, the alliance has endured political shifts, security threats, and social change on both sides of the Pacific. At its core, this relationship is built on security cooperation that deters aggression and preserves peace, economic and technological collaboration that fuels innovation and prosperity, cultural and human bonds that deepen understanding and trust across generations. Importantly, the alliance is not static. It has adapted to the times, evolving to meet challenges such as North Korea's nuclear ambitions, China's regional assertiveness, emerging threats like cyber warfare, climate disruption, and pandemics. It has also weathered moments of tension, proving its resilience in the face of policy disagreements, shifting public sentiments, and competing global interests. Yet what makes the US-ROK alliance truly unique is not just its military might or diplomatic significance. It's the people who have built, sustained, and enriched it. Veterans, students, families, entrepreneurs, educators, and everyday citizens who have shared stories, created opportunities, and imagined a better future together. As we look ahead, the alliance stands not only as a bulwark of regional stability, but as a forward-looking partnership poised to lead on global challenges, from green energy to AI ethics, from digital trade to pandemic response. In a world increasingly defined by uncertainty and rapid change, the US-South Korea alliance endures as a beacon of cooperation, resilience, and democratic solidarity. The journey that began in the 19th century continues today, not as a relic of the past, but as a living, evolving partnership that remains vital to peace, progress, and shared prosperity in the 21st century and beyond.